First thing I saw this morning when I went to my phone was a message from Matt, who sent me a really sad story about an adorable pet squirrel named Peanut who was confiscated from his home and euthanized by the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York. So I started my day with a frown. They also executed Fred the raccoon as well, another one of his pets. So the Department of Environmental Conservation was not really conserving the environment. Instead, they were preserving their KD ratio here, just piling up corpses of beloved pets of this man. It's disgusting. The reason the Department of Clowns gave is a load of barnacles. They said they got anonymous complaints, thus they showed up here like fucking every villain is Lemons from SpongeBob, and they confiscated his pets because there was a risk of rabies exposure through him having a squirrel and a raccoon in his home. And then when they were kidnapping the pets, one of the officers apparently got bit by the squirrel, and thus they were concerned about potential rabies. But the only way to test for rabies is on a dead animal, so they killed Fred and Peanut to test for rabies. An entirely avoidable tragedy here because there was no reason to confiscate them in the first place. First of all, the officer being bit is a pretty normal thing to happen here when you're abruptly taking an animal from its home. It's going to get scared and it's probably going to bite because it's frightened and doesn't know what to do. That's not exactly concerning, alarming behavior. That's unusual. And the owner had both Fred and Peanut for an extended period of time, and animals that have rabies usually don't last longer than 2 weeks. They're usually dead within 2 weeks. Of course, squirrels and raccoons can be vectors for rabies, but so can almost every other pet on the fucking planet, like dogs, for instance. Is the DEC going to start acting on anonymous phone calls claiming that their neighbor's dog might not have their rabies shot? Is the DEC going to bust through their fucking walls with a bazooka and start kidnapping people's dogs and euthanizing them to test for rabies? Probably not. I understand that raccoons are one of the largest vectors for rabies, but in this case the owner had him for so long that if it did have rabies, it would have shown symptoms and had already been dead. And he had Peanut for 7 years. So I think both were in the clear there, and from everything I saw and everything I read, he wasn't being irresponsible, taking them to dangerous locations where they could be exposed to an infectious animal where they could contract rabies. So I think the risk of rabies exposure with this is pretty low. Yes, it is illegal to have wild animals as pets, but he had had Peanut for 7 years, had tried to release it back to the wild where Peanut got injured, and it was clear he couldn't survive in the wild on his own anymore. The owner, the father of Peanut, his name is Mark Longo. He said that he found Peanut after his mother had been hit by a car, so he took him in, nursed him back to health. When he released him, it was clear he couldn't survive after getting injured pretty much immediately, and thus he had Peanut for 7 years, took him to vets, everything, did his due diligence, but he never had a permit to own Peanut or Fred the raccoon, and a bunch of anonymous weirdo losers on Instagram reported him to the DEC, who showed up with 6 officials, he's had fucking 6 officers deep in there like they're about to arrest Cobra Commander, and they took Fred and Peanut and then killed them. On October 30th, DEC seized a raccoon and squirrel sharing a residence with humans, creating the potential for human exposure to rabies. Now, I recognize that might sound like a logical reason to people that may have just had a lobotomy, but as a hypochondriac, I have studied rabies extensively because I worry about every fucking disease and virus on the planet, and I can tell you that rabies isn't just some kind of random mutation that happens. They're not the fucking X-Men. Animals get rabies from infected animals. It doesn't just spawn in there. It's not the Walking Dead virus where they just have it by default. They'd have to be exposed to it through either a bite or a scratch from an infected animal, or in any way getting saliva from an infected animal inside of them. And in extraordinarily rare cases, there is something called aerosolized rabies, which has only been documented in very humid caves with a lot of bats where there's poor ventilation, so they have had non-bite exposure through that. But I don't think Mark Longo has taken Fred and Peanut to the fucking caves next door like he was Batman or something. So I don't think there was a huge risk of Fred or Peanut having rabies, considering they both lived with him inside of his residence. They then just go on to say that to test for rabies, both animals were euthanized. The animals are being tested for rabies. Anyone who's been in contact with them is strongly encouraged to consult their physician, and then decline to comment further on it. Peanut and Fred were not a risk to the environment or a risk to those around them. This was just a complete waste of department resources that could have been better spent doing literally anything else. Actually anything else. I don't get New York's priorities at all here. When it comes to shit that actually matters, they are so slow and unresponsive. Yet, when it comes to killing this dude's pets, they're like Goku with instant transmission. They're there and ready. It just doesn't make any fucking sense to me. But hats off to the DEC for quickly and promptly executing these pets, keeping the city safe, doing the important work, the dirty work that people are afraid to do, but it needs to get done. So, if you like animals, sleep in fear, because the DEC might come over and just slit their fucking throats at some point, just for fun. I think this is just ridiculous. As you can tell, I'm pretty upset by it. There's really no justification I can see for this. This did nothing to help anyone, it just killed this guy's pets. The people that anonymously complained about it from the internet are some of the most joyless, vile cretins. Like, that is so pathetic. And from what I can tell, all this guy ever did was post cute videos with his squirrel Peanut. And he even has a non-profit for rescues where he has like 300 something animals there. It's called the Peanut Freedom Farm. Like, all this guy was doing was just minding his own business and posting adorable videos with his pet. And yet still, the loveless, brainless weirdos found a way to hate him for it, report him to the authorities to try and get his squirrel taken away, so that way he'd be as miserable as they are. I am still just blown away, jaw on the floor, with how quickly the New York DEC responded to this, to come over here and take this man's pets and then kill them. Because I know for sure that if you, right now in New York, called them up and said, "Help, I have a huge problem. I have raccoons and squirrels out the wazoo in my house. It's a major infestation. I think they might even be carrying rabies. I saw foam at the mouth. Help, I'm panicking. Can you get someone out here to come take them away?" They wouldn't show up. You'd wait 6 or 8 months if they even bothered to swing around there. You'd already be dead and your corpse fucking rotting in that house before they'd come around and actually try and do something about it. Yet for this case, with a social media superstar squirrel Peanuts, I guess they made an exception to get out there to execute him as promptly as possible. Now, as with everything, I've seen some people defending this, putting the cock of the DEC as deep down their throat as they can possibly muster. Mostly on Reddit. I've seen a lot of Redditors running some PR here for the New York DEC. And the big thing they keep harping on is, it's Mark Longo's fault. He's a narcissist because he posted videos of his squirrel for clout. He didn't have the proper paperwork, so play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Redditors love that one. They love that expression. That one's always a guaranteed thanks for the gold kind stranger moment. That's a certified Reddit platinum classic. So a not small number of Redditors in the comment section of this story that was on the front page were saying it's entirely Mark's fault. He is responsible for the death of these animals, and this was a justified action, barging into his home, taking them, and then euthanizing them. I think that is so fucking stupid. I think it's okay to say, like, why didn't he go through the process of getting whatever paperwork he needed? From what I can tell, he tried. In fact, he was in the process of getting Peanuts as a registered educational animal when this happened. And from also what I can tell, he was also planning on trying to release Fred after it was fully back to health. So apparently Fred was dropped off at his place, and they nursed Fred back to a healthy state, and they were planning on releasing him into the wild once he was ready to be. But even still, he did have Peanut for 7 years and didn't have the paperwork. Big fucking whoop. I don't think that should be a death sentence. I don't understand why people are so excited about the government's ability to just come into your home and kill your pets. Like, why is that something that people are going to try and champion? Like, Mark Longo's fault. Should have had that paperwork. Would have kept his animals alive. They'd still be breathing right now. I think this is a totally fair response, a totally fair punishment for not having paperwork. We're going to kill your pets. I think that's stupid. Yes, I believe there was probably a way Mark could have had the paperwork earlier, sure, but I don't think it should be just a death sentence for the pets because he didn't. I think it's ridiculous. Unless there was extenuating circumstances where the animals were living in a terrible environment, they were in harm's way, they were abused or something like that, which has happened in the past. There have been stories where people have taken wild animals, domesticated them, and then they put them in like the worst possible conditions that they're living in, and eventually the authorities swoop in and take them. That has happened, and those I do think make sense. But here, in the case of Peanuts and Fred, I don't think there was any of that going on, at least not from what's been reported. I think if that was the case, the DEC would have absolutely tried to save their own ass, saying, when we went there, Peanuts was in a malnourished state, he was surrounded by filth, neglected, abused, or in any of that. no information there. None of that was stated, so I don't think that's what happened here. This truly seems like a complete abuse of power. I don't think this was necessary at all. So yeah, anyway, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. That's it. See ya.